This is a regal story, taking you back in time of how a lady's hair captivated the emperor. Sit back and relax. Part 1. The dust of the imperial road tasted like every other dust, but it carried the weight of centuries. May coughed, spitting out the grit, her head throbbing from the disorienting lurch that had deposited her here. One moment, she'd been in her studio, the scent of her oils and the hum of the city a familiar blanket. The next, a silent concussion of air, a sensation of being pulled through a keyhole, and then, this. Sun-baked clay, the braying of donkeys in the stairs. So many stairs, she pushed herself up, her palms scraping on the rough, compacted earth. Her jeans were torn at the knee, and her simple linen shirt felt suddenly, absurdly out of place. The people around her weren't in costume. They were living, breathing, and dressed in rough spun tunics. The language that washed over her was a melodic, unfamiliar stream. Panic, cold and sharp, began to needle at her. She stumbled back against a sun-warmed wall, trying to make herself small. This wasn't a reenactment. The smells of animal dung, of cooking oil, of unwashed bodies and aromatic herbs were too real, too immediate, and then the world parted. A hush fell, deeper than mere silence. It was a vacuum of sound, filled only by the rhythmic tramp of heavy sandals. The crowd on the street pressed itself back, bowing heads as a phalanx of soldiers in leather and bronze armor marched past, their faces set in grim, professional masks. They cleared a path through the center of the dusty road. Behind them, carried on a litter of polished cedar wood by a dozen straining men, was a man who could only be an emperor. He didn't need the gold circlet on his brow to announce it. His posture, the absolute, unthinking authority in his gaze, screamed of power. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a clean-shaven, strong-jawed face and eyes that scanned his subjects not with kindness, but with the detached assessment of a farmer surveying his fields. May shrank further into the shadow of the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Don't see me, don't see me," she chanted silently, a desperate mantra. The litter drew abreast of her. The emperor, whose name she did not know, was listening to an older man walking beside him, pointing at something in the distance. He gave a short, dismissive nod. And then, as if tugged by an invisible string, his head turned. His gaze swept over the bowed heads of the crowd, a perfunctory motion, and then it stopped. It landed on her. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in pure, unadulterated confusion. He blinked, once, twice, as if trying to clear a mirage from his vision. He was looking directly at her hair. May had always been unusual. In her time, her hair was her signature, the thing people remembered. It wasn't just its color, a deep auburn that flashed copper in the sun. It was its texture, its cut. She wore it in a modern, artfully messy shag, layers of it falling across her forehead and cheeks, chopped in a way that was intentionally asymmetrical. It was a style born of salon scissors, texturizing spray, and a certain urban nonchalance. Here in this ancient world, it was an impossibility. The women around her had long, dark hair, intricately braided and coiled, adorned with beads and simple pins. Their hair was controlled, structured, a part of the architecture of their society. May's hair was a rebellion. It was wild. It was free. It was utterly, devastatingly anachronistic. The emperor's litter halted. The soldiers, sensing the break in rhythm, stopped marching. The entire procession ground to a standstill in the middle of the dusty street. The silence became profound, tense. He didn't speak. He just stared. His advisors followed his gaze, their own expressions shifting from curiosity to bewilderment. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd, people daring to glance up to see what had captured their ruler's attention so completely. May stood frozen, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf. She saw his eyes trace the line of her hair where it swept across her eyebrow, drop to the choppy layers that framed her jaw, and linger on the way the sunlight caught the different hues of white and platinum. There was no lust in his look. Not yet. It was something far more potent, sheer, unadulterated intrigue. He was looking at a puzzle, a lock for which he had no key. He was a man who owned everything in his world, and he was seeing something he could not possibly own, because it did not belong to his world at all. One of the advisors, a man with a severe face and a sharp beard, leaned in and said something low and urgent, his tone clearly suggesting they move on. The emperor ignored him. Slowly, never taking his eyes off her, he raised a hand, a single finger pointing directly at May. He spoke a single, quiet word. It was a command. Two of the guards broke from the formation, their hands moving to the pommels of their short swords as they strode toward her. The crowd fell back, creating a wide berth around her, isolating her completely. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a understanding, not with a way home, but with the grip of a soldier's hand on her arm, dragging her toward an emperor who looked at her as if she were a fascinating, alien insect. The guard's hand closed around her bicep, his grip like iron. As he pulled her forward, her eyes locked with the emperor's. In his deep, dark gaze, the confusion was now mingled with something else, something fierce and possessive. He had seen something unique, something he had never seen before, and in his world, such things were simply taken. The journey to the palace was a blur of terror and overwhelming sensation. The grip of the guard was unyielding, his armor clinking with every step, a metronome counting down to her unknown fate. They didn't drag her, exactly, but their pace allowed for no resistance. She was marched through towering gates of bronze-reinforced wood, past walls so high they seemed to scrape the sky, and into a world of staggering, silent opulence. The imperial palace was not just a building. It was a city within a city, a labyrinth of courtyards, gardens, and soaring halls built of pale, veined marble. The air changed, becoming cooler, scented with cedar smoke, exotic incense, and the faint, sweet smell of flowering vines. Servants in simple, clean tunics moved with silent efficiency, their eyes fixed firmly on the ground. They didn't stare at her. Their discipline was absolute. She was taken not to a dungeon, but to a suite of rooms. The space was sparsely furnished, but of a quality she had only seen in museums. A low bed piled with embroidered linens and furs, a chair of dark, polished wood, a large ceramic basin filled with still water. The door shut behind her with a definitive thud of wood and the scrape of a heavy bolt. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. Hours passed, measured by the slow crawl of sunlight across the intricate mosaic floor. Panic gave way to a numb, weary shock. She was here. This was real. The weight of it pressed down on her, a physical force. The door opened. It was not the guards, but a severe-looking woman with red streaks in her tightly coiled black hair. She was followed by two younger women carrying bundles of cloth and a tray of food. The older woman's eyes, sharp and missing nothing, scanned May from head to toe, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on her hair. She clapped her hands twice, a sound like cracking stone, and the younger women set down their burdens. "You will wash, you will eat, you will be made presentable," the woman said, her voice devoid of inflection. She didn't seem to expect a response, and May, her throat closed with fear, gave none. The bath was a ritual of humiliation and wonder. The serving women, whose names she learned were Lin and Chai, were hesitant, almost afraid to touch her. They used fine, abrasive cloths and scented oils that smelled of almonds and laurel, scrubbing the dust of the road from her skin as if purifying something unclean. They whispered to each other in hushed, urgent tones, their eyes wide when they thought she wasn't looking. Their fascination was with everything: the texture of her modern underwear, the metal zip on her jeans which they could not fathom, the peculiar simplicity of her sneakers. But it was her hair that truly captivated them. They tried to wet it, their fingers hesitantly combing through the short, layered strands. They held up sections, marveling at its choppy, uneven ends so different from the long, seamless flows they were accustomed to. They didn't try to braid it or coil it. They simply gave up, shaking their heads in bewilderment, leaving it to fall as it naturally did, a wild corona around her head. The clothes they brought were a soft, undyed linen shift. It was simple, humble. They left the food flatbread, cheese, olives, and a piece of roasted fowl land withdrew, bolting the door once more. It was later, as she picked at the food, that the emperor came. He entered without announcement, the door opening and closing so quietly, she jumped. He had changed from his public regalia into a simpler, though still impeccably white, tunic edged with a narrow purple band. He carried no weapon. He needed none. His presence alone filled the room, making the air feel thin. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, and looked at her. It was the same look from the road, but closer, more intense. The initial shock had been replaced by a deep, analytical curiosity. And in all of that, May wondered, why was the emperor here? Why did he take me from the streets and lock me up in his palace? What am I doing here? She sat there staring at him as his gaze burned on her. His curiosity clouded around both of them like a heavy rain cloud. The emperor traced her from head to toe, taking in every intricate detail, her hair, the color, and her posture. Remembering her clothes, while May, a little shy, turned away in confusion, but she couldn't look. The gaze was intimidating. Then he spoke.